So greetings, here to talk to us today about the process of lament, why we lament, how we can be a people of lament when we're in this really wild season of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm here to talk with Rev Dr Micah McCreary about lament, trauma, about the psychological and the spiritual, and how those come together. My name is Andy Bossardet, and I am the coordinator for Equipping Thriving Congregations, joining you from my basement here in Michigan as we record these videos on Zoom and in the middle of these stay-at-home orders. But I am super excited to be joined by Reverend Dr. McCreary. If you could introduce yourself a little bit. You're the president of New Brunswick Theological Seminary. You're a pastor. You're a professor. You're a therapist. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what brings you to this conversation.
Yeah, great to be with you, Andy. One of the thoughts that hit me while you were even saying that, we would have probably scheduled a trip either from here in New Brunswick to Michigan, or you from Michigan to here, and we can just do it on Zoom. And so I think I prefer the trip, no question, but I'll take this as well. This is more frugal as far as budgets and all that's concerned. What can I say about me? I'm from Detroit, Michigan. So Detroit's my home, and the oldest of 7 children. My father was my first pastor, and I walk like him to this day, think like him a lot. My mom still talks about how much she loved him. And one of the reasons why this topic is so important to me, my father was in the military and was in the Korean War. And it was during that war that he was tortured. And back in Detroit, a few years later, during the riots, his post-traumatic stress disorder overwhelmed him and resulted from this great man of God, this good man, falling from grace and leaving our family. And if you can never fall from grace is a whole nother question, the theological positions around that. So I think God still loved him, but my family saw him no longer as grace-filled at that time. He went on to struggle. I went on to become an engineer, and because I really felt that I needed a job that had money. So even though I really loved ministry, for me, it was about finding a career where I could make a living to help my mom, to take care of myself. But engineering, while there, my brother under me wound up going to jail for murder. And when he went to jail, it changed me. I really saw life differently, and so I would admit differently, but it also pushed me back into the bosom of God, into the arms of God. And that combination, after engineering, I worked for a few years and then wound up going to seminary to work with youth, wound up being a youth pastor, a youth director, only became a pastor because it paid more and I was able to pay my bills and go to graduate school. In graduate school, because youth had told me they really needed help with their parents, they didn't need great sermons and great programs, they needed help with family. I studied psychology and finished at Virginia Commonwealth University, my master's and doctorate in psychology. Became a licensed clinical psychologist a few years later, but became a professor of psychology and spent about 20 years doing that. But at the same time, which my university did not value or like, I also pastored a church. I wound up pastoring the church with my wife as my co-pastor. And together, we did, I think what God would bless us to do. When we left there to come to be president, my daughter was the minister of music. My wife and I were the senior pastors. So it was a family affair. And church has just been like that. I had a couple of administrative positions at the university before coming here as president. And I've been now president of New Brunswick for 3 years. I am a minister of Word and Sacrament with the Reformed Church in America, and proud of that as well.
That's excellent, and so good to have you on this conversation. And when you said 3 years, I was blown away. I thought, like, 3 years, how is that possible? And yet, I've really been glad for your friendship and your partnership in the gospel. And thank you for sharing of your story. That we're not talking today about a topic that's disconnected from us. This isn't the impact of Ugaritic on modern culture, right? This is deep. This is lament.
Yeah.
It's pain. It's suffering. And so we're living in this time that is full of pain, full of lament, full of difficulty. And I would even say a time where we are experiencing one of those rare global traumas that
Yes.
is impacting everyone in different ways. We've lost people, we've been isolated, we've been afraid, and we're experiencing this trauma in different ways, but there's some commonalities too. And so part of what I want to talk to you today about is about trauma and lament. And so just for our folks who are listening and watching this, who may have a definition of trauma from somewhere out in the culture, somewhere from their own training, let's get on the same wavelength. And how do you define trauma?
For me, three words. It's an experienced tragic event. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really how I look at it. It's something, whether the experience is you were deeply involved in it or you witnessed it. I witnessed domestic violence, and that traumatized me as much as I experienced domestic violence. And so that's there in that sense. And it only becomes what we call post-traumatic when there are these reoccurring thoughts about it, these reoccurring dreams. And that's what you want to prevent, is that, yes, a lot of people have trauma and traumatic experiences, but how do you thrive from that is where I see our conversations going. So there are a lot of things that really traumatize us, a lot of things that disturb us. And if it stops there, I think we're minimizing who we are as a people, who we are as God's people, because there are some responses we can have to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say in part is that when we have these deep, painful experiences, if we stop at just we had this experience and now we don't have it anymore, we don't do the work of processing. That's what it's like. When we were preparing for this, I remember
Yes.
using the analogy of the beach ball holding a beach ball underwater, and eventually that
Yeah.
beach ball is going to come to the surface.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so, theologically, biblically, we see it across the Psalms, we see it in the prophets. We
Yes.
see that God's people often respond to this trauma with lament. And so I appreciate how you have talked in the past about kind of what's the psychological impact of
Mm-hmm,
trauma and lament, and what's the
mm-hmm.
spiritual impact of the trauma and lament. Not that those are two different categories that
Sure,
are
sure.
separate from each other, but they're
Mm-hmm.
distinct and connected to each other.
Yeah,
I'm wondering
yeah,
if you could talk a little bit about that.
yeah. I psychologically too is the internal piece. It's that piece that I have control over. Spiritual for me is that part of me that is connected to the divine, that many times, I have to just trust God. And that's where I think spiritual really happens. It may appear like the same process, but there's some things, that I can do within me. And those are what I would call the psychological pieces. They're the pieces that we can do as community. Those are the sociological pieces. But they're just some pieces that happen in my relationship with my belief system. And to me, that's where the spirit is, where you can't prove it, you can't confirm it sometimes. It just is. And I think a lot of times we don't differentiate, which I think can be helpful in trauma. It's like, okay, because the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more
Yes.
likely you are to fix whatever problem you're dealing with. And so if I know this is my sociological tool, so I'm going to go to my brother Andy and we're going to have a conversation, I can share my burden, or it's psychological. I can do some meditation, I can do some mindfulness exercises, or it's spiritual. I can pray, I can read the word, and those kind of things. And I'm not putting them in that order in priority. Please, no one hear that. I
Mm-hmm.
would reverse them quite quickly if I could. And so that's kind of there with that. Yeah.
Right. And so that's excellent. So we have the psychological, we have those internal pieces, we have the sociological, we have those things that we connect with others about, and we have the spiritual, that which interacts with God, and find healing in all of those. And so you listed some of the practices of the psychological, the sociological, and the spiritual. But for our folks who are listening who are saying, okay, how do I take care of all of me?
Mm,
What are some practices? Can we do a little
yeah.
bit of a deep dive on those three things? What are some
Okay.
things that people can do today
Yeah.
that would?
Well, one would be, for me, it's a thought piece, and Viktor Frankl helps with this. And I think him surviving the death camps
Hmm.
were powerful there. And what Viktor Frankl said was that we have a stimulus and then there's a response to the stimulus. And most people, when they get into trauma, the stimulus happens and they respond. And where we can use either psychological, sociological, or spiritual, is that space in between stimulus and response. You know,
Hmm.
there is when something happens, you know, emotional intelligence tells us and teaches us count to 6, count to 10, and in that counting space, you know, you slow yourself down enough to then respond.
Hmm.
I take it even further. During that space in between, why not say a prayer? During that space in between, why not, you know, decide I'm going to talk to a friend? During that space in between the terrible, painful stimulus that's happened, and before I respond, I'm going to really focus my meditation, you know, chanting my prayers, etc. And then when I do respond, I come to that response with a much more peaceful, a much more prayerful, much more focused mindset. And so to me, that's kind of where that comes in as well. I actually started calling that the Holy Saturday.
Mm.
That's that liminal space, that pausing space, that transformational space that we can have, you know, and it happens all the time, but I don't think we consciously do it. And I'm arguing, make the unconscious conscious. You know, make that space. Okay, yes, I was crucified on my crucifixion Friday, and I know and believe in my faith that there's going to be a resurrection Sunday. But right now in this COVID-19, right now in this situation I'm in my Holy Saturday. I'm in that time where I have to descend into hell, you know, with Christ and lead captivity captive. Or my favorite one is to descend there and have to sit down with Lazarus in Abraham's bosom and have a
Mhm.
conversation, you know.
Yes.
And in that conversation, it strengthens me to know how I live my life matters. And then I move into my resurrection that way.
Yeah. So that's so powerful. The image that we're in the Holy Saturday moment,
Mm-hmm.
and just like for Christ, it's not up for us when the resurrection happens,
Yeah, yeah,
but we do have this time that there's a pause where we could get in touch with ourselves.
yeah.
I've found, and this happened probably more so since my grandfather's passing from COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
But when that happened, I found my patience on
Mm-hmm.
social media
Mm-hmm.
dropped, and
Yeah.
I have probably 45 or so
Mm-hmm.
deleted tweets
Mm-hmm.
alone, and that's not even counting Facebook messages and
Mm-hmm.
Facebook
Mm-hmm.
comments. And some of those got through the filter, but
Yeah.
I just fire off something and I look at it and I say, wow, what is
Mm-hmm.
this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only what
I,
is this, should I do this or not, right? Like, it's
mm-hmm.
not just
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
should I do the right thing or should I do the wrong thing. It's also what's happening inside of me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's happening inside that's that beach ball. What's that begging to come
Mm-hmm.
out? And it's about to
Mm-hmm.
come out in sarcasm and cruelty and viciousness and malice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the holy pause. I think that
Yeah.
the way I hear
Yeah.
you talking.
Oh, yeah. Because if you just respond in that broken state, you may have a broken response.
Hmm.
And the thing is, a broken response will lead more likely to another broken stimulus, which leads to another broken response. And you wind up with a cyclical brokenness. And, you know, some people thrive in brokenness, but typically we thrive in what we do to fix the brokenness. And that's
Mm.
what you really want to do. I was just coming off of this meeting from a call with my faculty and staff colleagues, where of course we lost two wonderful members of our community to the COVID-19, Al Jensen and Greg Mass. And
Mhm.
Reverend Dr. Greg Mass was my predecessor, I'm his successor at New Brunswick as president. And to hear the community talk about their love for him, you know, and how he really blessed them, it felt good to then listen to that in that space. And my response was, as a new person to this community, in that sense, only 3 years in, I can say to you that Greg Mass loved you all,
Mm.
and it what and his love was shown in the way he actually assisted me in becoming president. In the way the first call I got after the board, called me was from him. Let's meet, and we've met and we've talked, and his thoughts about the ministry of the presidency of the seminary has just been helpful. But I realized in hearing their conversations that it was because of them, not just because of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of learning that happens in those pause spaces is also what's very, very, very helpful moving forward. I mean, there's so much, there are gifts in the pause. There are gifts in that time of reflection. There are gifts in that time of breathing in, of really seeking God and understanding how am I to use this. That's a gift. But we are so busy wanting to get out of the Holy Saturday
Mm-hmm.
to the resurrection, because we
Yes.
see the resurrection as the gift. We miss the fact that I'm being gifted now to be better once I'm restored, And so, yeah, that's the piece there.
Yes. Well, thank you so much
Oh,
about
you're welcome.
talking about this difficult topic, and we're all in the middle of it. We're all in Saturday, and to be able to talk about opening ourselves to love, opening ourselves to gift, and recognizing what we can do in the midst of this trauma, that the lament can come out of us, and the lament can be good, and the lament can be faithful. I look forward to us talking again in the near future about how we can keep going with lament. Do you have anything else you want to add before I
Well,
say?
I just want to put back in Holy Saturday. I mean, we can say Saturday, but it puts it into a different context when it's Holy Saturday. I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to, yeah.
Yes, it's Holy Saturday, and so as
Holy
we
Saturday.
move through this,
Mm-hmm.
may we all experience the holy presence of God and the holy presence of a holy God in the midst of
Amen.
this. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr.
Thank
Mike
you.
McCreary.
My pleasure, sir.